You had a pretty big online blow up around an incident with an Audi R8.
I'm not denying that I wasn't speeding. A massive regret of what I did. The Crown Prosecution Service clearly decided to make an example of me. I didn't own a car until I was 23, 24.
You have press cars, do a review, but then what that also does is probably make it very difficult to be honest.
I believe I'm fully honest and engaged.
Drive system in these cars, absolutely mind-blowing.
I've had a couple of cars over the last few years that I've thought were absolute dog shit. And I've contacted the press department and just said, look, take the car back. I'm not even making a video on it.
Do you get paid by BMW?
There's no money exchanged, but I've heard rumours that...
Joe Achilles gets speeding fine after police spot video of him driving.
The video went live on my Instagram page. I got an email from the Audi press department saying, we've had a notice of intended prosecution. Yes, I was a driver. They put me down as dangerous driving and excessive speeding. And I said, as far as I'm aware, I wasn't speeding and I wasn't dangerous driving. I couldn't open the front door because there was an envelope that was that big behind it. CPS, basically going through frame by frame. You'd think I'd just gone and murdered like 50 children or something. It was just horrible. I hated that period of my life.
Joe, to me it seems like you've been around this world of cars and social media for longer than I can remember. You were the first person that I ever saw reviewing German cars. You were the first person that was really passionate about that world and side of things. And you're the first person I ever saw trying to drive a car miles on one tank of fuel. But that's me summing you up. Joe, in your own words, who are you and what do you do?
Hey guys, my name is Joe Achilles, and these days I run an automotive YouTube channel. Mostly based around German cars. And I also co-host another podcast, automotive podcast called the Drive Talk Podcast.
And you do that at Podium Place, which I'm very familiar with. It's flipping awesome up there. And you've been doing YouTube for how many years now?
Probably, I reckon, nearly 11 years. But it started very much as a hobby, and I've been doing it full-time since 2021.
So if you could have told yourself 11 years ago that this is what you'd be doing now and some of the adventures you've been on, some of the cars you've got to drive, some of the cars that it's been able to make you own, would you have believed yourself 11 years ago?
Not at all. It's something I've talked to a lot of up-and-coming YouTubers about, especially. And I think a really good sound bit of advice to anyone that is starting out is... never do it for the fame or the money initially. Do it because you love it. It's your passion. And that's, I think we'll probably get into talking about that a bit more later. But I think it started with me because it was a way of sharing my passion online. And over those years of hard work, graft, and a lot of investment, it's now my living. And yeah, it's awesome. Just you saying that now to me, I still pinch myself every day as a 45-year-old man that I'm finally doing something that I love.
And where did that passion come from, though? What sparked that passion? What did life look like growing up? Was you always around cars? Can you paint us a little bit of a picture?
Grew up in central London, so probably not the most, well, in one way, yes, a great car central in terms of supercars. Literally, I grew up in Paddington, so not far from, Park Lane and all the hot spots these days. So I grew up around them in that aspect, but I didn't own a car until I was 23, 24. My parents are not into cars at all. My dad rolls around in a sort of 10-year-old Passat and will continue to roll around in that until it completely dies. My friends and family, not really much into cars. So I never had an avenue when I was really young, or I couldn't envision a way of getting into the industry. What got me addicted to cars? Well, I think from the youngest age, I used to pick up magazines and watch whatever I could on TV back then. But my auntie and uncle who live in the south of France, my uncle used to have a very good job, and he would have a 3 Series BMW, which at the time was an E30 325i Sport, which was the beautiful one with the sort of wing on the boot spoiler. The beautiful alloys. It was just a very, very cool car of its time. And when I was old enough, sort of 6, 7 years old, I used to sit on my auntie's lap and she used to let me drive up and down their driveway in the Ardèche. They live in the mountains. It was about a 2-kilometre driveway, dirt driveway, which in fact I was on last year when I took my parents down there. And so it always brings back memories. And then when I was about 8, 9, 10 years old, I'm quite tall these days. I was back then. As soon as I was tall enough, my auntie used to let me drive their car up and down the driveway on summer holidays when we'd go down there. So my parents would never see me on these trips because I'd just constantly be going up and down the drive. So that got me massively interested in cars furthermore. And I think was the early days of my love and affection around BMW, which is, no secret that I'm a bit of a BMW diehard.
And I think the thing with BMW diehards that I find all the time when they come on the podcast is people either know nothing or all of it.
Yes.
There's nothing in the middle. There's like no middle space whatsoever. You've got me sat in the nothing side of like, okay, I like a G81, I like an M2, I like this. And you'll have like yourself or maybe Taylor, my friend, or someone else come on that's obsessed with BMW.
Yeah.
And they'll be rolling out, oh, it's got this engine, it's this, it's one of these series. And I'm like, there is so much to know about that brand. It's like knowing every other Italian car put together just in one German brand kind of thing. There is so much content around them. So when you were growing up in your teenage years, were you also captivated by that brand?
Yeah, I was. I think that love continued, and I always aspired to owning something from BMW in sort of down the track, but never knew when that was going to be. And yeah, I think the first BMW I owned was a used E46 330 Ci 6-speed manual. Very cool car. Had lots of I say very cool. It was a nightmare. I bought it a few years old, and the clutch went in like the first week, and that was about $2,500. And yeah, I had loads of issues with that car, but still, I've got fond memories of it because it was my first BMW ownership. And it had a 6-cylinder engine, which you had to have, as in my opinion, that sort of, especially the 3 Series, it's like 6-cylinder engine, manual box, rear-wheel drive. I've made it in life. But yeah, my love for cars, etc., continued through my sort of teenage years and into my adult life. But I continued on in a completely different direction in terms of, what I did as a living, my day-to-day work.
And what was that? So when you were coming out of school, when you were a teenager, what was it that you were going into? What was it that you kind of wanted to be? Because I'm guessing the idea to be an automotive YouTuber wasn't it.
Yeah, well, automotive YouTubers, that was even before Shmee's time. So we're talking black and white days, yeah. But obviously Top Gear and those Fifth Gear and those sort of things did. And then the likes of, let's say, Chris Harris started appearing, in magazines, especially first reading these articles. And I think my dream back then would have been to be a journalist of some description in the automotive space. But it just, again, it didn't even cross my mind as a potential because I'd never studied it. I didn't know it. I didn't have an in. As with so many things in life, you sometimes need a little bit of a help up with certain jobs and industries or an introduction. I just didn't have it and sort of kept doing my thing. So when I came out of college, I never actually went to uni. I raced mountain bikes for years when I was younger, and I decided to try and take that seriously. Went to Australia for a few years and hurt myself too many times, and had a lot of fun along the way, but ended up realizing that I wasn't good enough to be pro, and B, it wasn't going to pay the bills.
What is it with every car guest that comes on this podcast that they've had some sort of history with bikes? Like every single one of them is a BMXing or biking, and then there's me. I get given 2 wheels and a handlebar, and I nearly break my back every 2 seconds. So it feels like maybe it's the guys that love BMW. They come from a biking world, and there's some weird link that we don't see there. But that was your world as well.
Yeah, well, it's true, isn't it? Like you got Adam LZ. Obviously, we got we got Matt Armstrong over here. Their sort of BMX backgrounds, and a lot of the top mountain bikers that I still know to this day, like Brendan Fairclough.
I'd love to have Matt Jones on this.
Matt Jones, yeah. Matt Jones is he's a massive petrol head, isn't he?
He's agreed to doing one, and
brilliant.
everyone was captivated when he did the car over his house. And
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that gets all of us excited about content creation when we see something like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Those guys are just Sam Reynolds is the other guy, good friends with Matt. They're all a tight knit group of friends, all at the top of their game, and but they all love cars, you know. And it's bizarre when you speak to someone like Sam or Brendan, and they get as excited talking to me about a car that I might have in my driveway as I do seeing them jump their house or whatever. You know, they don't understand why I'm so excited about what they're doing, and likewise, I can't get over that they get excited around the car or a particular film, whatever. It's very cool. But I think there's a massive crossover there, even from back in the days when I raced bikes. You'd turn up to these events and a lot of the pros would always have something punchy in the car park. Maybe not quite to your level of car, but I think there's definitely some kind of crossover. Even with road cyclists, Tom Pidcock, I speak to him a lot online, and Tom's a massive petrol head. He's got some awesome cars and had some awesome cars over the past few years. So there's definitely some kind of correlation there between fast bikers and fancy cars.
But there's also a correlation between you pursuing a non-normal career line, if you know what I mean, away from the 9 to 5 and going into something that's competitive and sponsored and that kind of world.
Yep.
As a kind of first innings to where you are now, because it's a similar kind of thing. You're selling yourself as a brand, as a creator, and that was kind of what you went into first. So I know you've done a lot since then. So how did that journey unfold?
Yeah, so after the Australian days or years, I came back and sort of settled back in the UK, and I did a few. I've done a lot of things in my younger life, but I ended up sort of settling into the fashion industry, which is so far away from what I love and what I'm passionate about. But it was through an old friend of mine. Her mum owns an agency in London called Storm, who founded people like Kate Moss. So it's a big agency, one of the big main ones in London. And I ended up there. At the time, I was struggling a bit with life. I was just going through a bit of a mental challenge in terms of my life, where I was going, maybe I was a bit unhappy and just had my own struggles. And one day went down to meet this girl called Noelle, and I met her at the agency, and I was just like surrounded by beautiful men and women and just this vibe and all these things going on. And I was just sitting there thinking, wow, this would be cool working here. You know, obviously it's a bit like when you go on holiday and you think, oh, I'd love to live here. It's not always the same when you work in there, but anyway, long story short, the very next week they had someone walk out on them. And because I had a good connection with the family, her mum, Sarah, said, Joe, do you fancy a job? And I literally just dropped the job that I had at the time and went and worked there. And 7-8 years later, I was still there doing a job that I really didn't understand. You know, but I say that, I'm probably discrediting myself a little bit, but I didn't care for or understand the fashion side of it. I was an agent essentially, and my my products were the girls that I looked after, the girls that were in town, and I was selling them to clients. So again, a very similar thing to what you and I do today. And I worked in that industry for years. I then left Storm and worked for ASOS.com, and another big company and brand that people are probably very familiar with. I ran their e-com model side. So I used to book on average at the time, so this was back in 2011, 2012, I booked 144 models a week in their studios in London. So it was like a chicken farm. I mean, honestly, the turnover and the metrics behind it all, unbelievable, and I'm sure it still is. But yeah, so that was really interesting. But it was during that time where I started to get itchy feet, and I just didn't want to be. You mentioned it a minute ago, the 9 to 5. I didn't want to be stuck in front of a computer. And in the fashion industry, it's not 9 to 5. It's usually 8 till 8, on some occasions, because you're always working harder, which I appreciate a lot of people do in this day and age, especially. But I just found my weekends were going like that. My life was going like that. And I just wanted to try and fill some of my spare time with stuff that I love. So while I was at ASOS, I was looking after as like a secondary job. I was looking after some high-end supermodels as like a chaperone / driver, but I had to do it under sort of chaperone because I wasn't a licensed driver at the time. So I used to look after a couple of sort of celebrities in that world.
I've heard of worse jobs.
Yes, yeah. Well, at the time, it really was a job. You know, it's weird, isn't it? Like but now I look back on those days and I just think, wow, they were fun and cool, and I do love them. But at the time, it was just part of what I was doing, and I was surrounded by that type of people, so it kind of was a bit more normal, if you like. But it got me to a point where, because I was working for ASOS and I had all of these other modelling agencies around London in my palm, they would take me out to lunch, wining and dining me because they wanted me to book as many models as possible, that I thought I could step away and set up a chauffeuring business within London, focusing on the fashion industry and the contacts that I had. In my head, that was to get me away from a computer and get me behind the wheel of a car, even if it meant I was sitting in London traffic. Because to me, that was then fulfilling part of what I love, i.e. being in a car, a nice car. The stubborn person I am, even though back then, undoubtedly, the S-Class was sort of the go-to chauffeuring car, I went and got a 7 Series.
Of course.
And turned up to a lot of red carpet events, usually with some of one of the biggest sort of celebrities in a 7 Series amongst a sea of S-Classes and Range Rovers, and I used to love it. But yeah, and so I ended up setting this business up and then leaving ASOS straight into my chauffeuring business. It was a small business. It was a one-man band essentially, but I had a lot of other subcontracted drivers that I knew well, that I'd worked with for years as a booker. And so when I was busy, I'd take them on. When I wasn't, it would just be me. And I loved that job. But what it meant was I had, as with a lot of self-employed jobs, I was either flat out working sort of 2 weeks, 16-hour days back to back. And then I would have like 2 weeks of nothing because my main clients would be out of town or whatever. And at that time, I'd just purchased an M135i, the original F20.
They go F20. This is when I say they talk about the engines. They can't, any BMW fan can't mention BMW without talking about the exact engine that's in it as well.
That had an N55 exactly. There goes, yeah, give it. The thing is, the danger of that is if I don't get that right, then I'll know about it. So I've got to be I don't claim to be too much of it.
Well, I go nowhere near it.
Yeah. You just sit back and listen. So I purchased this M135i off the back of actually Chris Harris's original comparison against an RS3. And because it was quite a hot car at the time, there was a lot of people on forums asking about options or how to activate launch control, whatever it might be. And so I thought, naively, let's just stick a GoPro in the car and just record a few videos. This is how you activate whatever. You know, they were lame videos, but it was much easier showing that than trying to apply in a forum and trying to explain how to do it, you know, like a instruction manual. There's a video. Oh, cool.
And this is in the days that those videos are being born as well, isn't it? So we're now at, like, for context, like 2015?
Earlier, probably 2013, 14. Yeah, so exactly around those times, but still around the time that I knew, like, someone like Tim Schmee had already established himself. So there was some YouTubers out there that had already grown a fair amount in those early years. But I wasn't trying to, at that stage, it was literally like, oh, cool, I can share it. And then in 2014, maybe 15, end of 2014, I think, I went through a really bad breakup. We lived at the time in a small little cottage just outside of London. And I suddenly was on my own, working as a chauffeur, which is quite a lonely job if your home life isn't that great. It was winter months and it could have gone one or two ways. I could have ended up getting really depressed, drinking myself to bed every night and whatever else. Or suddenly, and don't get me wrong, I've got lovely parents and family and friends around me, but in those times, sometimes you just shut down and you can't see, what's the saying? I get the saying, you can't see the
light.
The light, essentially, yeah. But thankfully, because of this new tiny audience at the time that were online, that were showing me this invisible love, i.e. through comments or, oh, great video, thanks for that. It was kind of like my escapism. So I would try and think of more ideas, whether it was filming my 7 Series or my 135, whatever, because every time I posted a video, more likely than not, I would get some positivity and love around it. And to me, it was like a cure. It was like some therapy. Yeah, like exactly that. Yeah. It was therapy, really, looking back on it. It really was, because, it's always good to talk, as they say.
Which is really interesting, because very rarely do you ever hear anybody talking about the early stages of starting something on social media as a positive thing.
Yep.
Like the more often than not, you hear negativity around it. Like, I remember when I first started this, it took me a while to understand how to be a better podcast host. It was brutal for 6 months in some of the comments section. But some people are just like yourself, unbelievably likable from day one and providing something to someone that's helpful. And there you go. You end up getting the kind of positivity off the back of that then. So it must have been quite a good Kickstarter to push you forward, I'm guessing.
It was, and don't get me wrong, the hate came, and I think I think a lot has changed in 10 years. The internet feel like they're a lot freer to say what they want these days. Back then, it was a bit more timid, and I remember, again, talking about Shmi, who I got to know in those early years. I remember him saying to me, I don't know, maybe 2015, 16, as the channel was starting to evolve a bit and grow, I remember I started getting some hatred, and there was some horrible bullying going on, cyberbullying, which at the time it was kind of like nobody took any notice of it. These days, people would probably take more notice of it and understand it. But I remember Tim saying to me, he was like, it's the second you're starting to get hate is the second that you're succeeding and you're doing well in life, which is definitely true. But it's very easy saying that to someone. It's like when you break up with someone going, or your dad going, oh, well, there's plenty more fish in the sea. It's like, yeah, well, that's great. But when you look back, it's like, he's very right. He was very true. And life is too short and all these sayings. But at the time, it's hard to, I focus a lot on the negativity still to this day. And I wish I didn't, but I'll get 50 lovely comments and then one horrible comment, and I'll focus on that. And it's like, why am I doing that? Like,
you also obviously have a lot of people that come on your podcast and a lot of creators and stuff.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the thing that is like the biggest thing to get over for most creators? Because I think it is. I think it's that comment section, and I think that is such a new thing to so many people, because in the days of Top Gear, occasionally they would refer to on stage the letters.
Yep.
They'd refer to just like, oh, the office was full of letters after last week's show of X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
They never had a comment section. I always am fascinated by the 3 personalities that were on there, of whether if they did have that comment section, would people like May have been a little bit more hit by
targeted,
a little bit more targeted, a little bit more bullied, a little bit more out there, and then what effect would it have had? And I feel like they were screened like the early creators so well by the fact that there wasn't that comment section. But I don't necessarily think people have changed. I just think people are able to put their opinion across a lot more.
Yeah, well, they've got the access. I mean, but it goes both ways, doesn't it? We've both got the access to do what we love and spread it to the world, thankfully. But then the other way is the rest of the public have got access to criticize what we're doing. And it's only, I mean, again, it's one of those things. It's like, well, you get people saying, well, you put yourself out there on a public forum, and we have. And so in a way, I think there's a fine line between criticism or a jokey comment, but then it's when people are really horrible. That's where you're like, well, that's just not right. If you don't like watching my video or you don't like me, why are you even here commenting? Go away.
That is legitimately go away. Look, I literally don't know the answer to that question. And I find that question fascinating, because it's just like, I really don't understand when someone has watched something to the end of something and just not gone away if they're not enjoying it. Like, me and a lot of the other creators that I sit with and do things with all talk about this. Like, when have we ever put a negative comment on someone's video? We've just switched the video off. They're not enjoying it. Yep. So that world does baffle me, but that is part of being a creator, and you only learn that as you evolve as a creator. So how were you evolving from those first early videos and the start of that channel to something that actually made you think, oh, this is actually possible for me to enter this world and actually do it for a living?
Well, it was an interesting recipe of events, I guess. I kept plugging away, building the YouTube channel up. Again, never, ever wishing or dreaming even that it would become a living one day. All I was hoping is that one day I would make as much from the YouTube ad revenue that it would cover the costs of the fuel and the camera gear and everything else, because this is what people don't see. You know, behind the scenes, there's a lot of cost and investment that goes in the early years. Time, number one, money, and just everything else, the stress of it all. And so, but I just kept going, focused all my energy on that. You know, I was single for, I think it was a combination of things that allowed me to do it. The fact I ran my own business, I had this spare, I worked hard and made good money when I was working, and then I had spare chunks of time that I was able to do what I love, my passion. I lived on my own, and I was single for maybe 3 or 4 years. And so that time, honestly, I would be up at 3, 4 a.m. editing videos, not because I had to, but because I enjoyed it, and it gave me that buzz, and it kept feeding this friend that online, you know, it's like boom, and like you get those endorphins, which I'm sure you do every time you put one of your podcasts online. You get that hit.
Not every time.
Yeah, it depends how yeah. Hopefully this one's a good hit, but I don't know. You never know. But yeah, you know what I mean. But that's all part of the buzz, isn't it? It's like, how's it going? Good. But the bad days also reward the good days, because you know you've got to have both, I think. But I just kept plugging away, kept going, and then I got to 2019. I met my lovely other half, Lou, who I'm marrying later this year, in 2019. So lots of good things came from 2019. And I got to the back end of that year, and I thought this whole YouTube thing could become a living if it carries on going how it's going. I really need to take it a bit more seriously, keep pushing to get invited on these press launches, etc., etc. Then obviously March 2020 came, COVID hit, and the whole world turned upside down overnight. And it's weird, because if you think about the two things I was doing, I ran a chauffeuring business, a hospitality business, pretty much travel business, and I ran a YouTube channel. So one of those died immediately, and the other one actually not took off overnight, because those first few months were lovely weather and most people weren't so much online. But as we know, as the year progressed, people were online, Netflix, YouTube, just consuming stuff. And the fact that I had a YouTube channel and I had a backlog of videos and I was still continuing to produce stuff when I could, the YouTube metrics are really good in 2020. And so I spent that entire year just trying to scrap together videos and cars that I could, because it was difficult. And it got to the end of that year, and I just thought, if I'm ever going to do it, now is the time that I focus on YouTube. So January or February 21, I handed my then 1-year-old 7 Series that had done about 500 miles in a year. I handed that back to Tony Lewis, who was very understanding and got me out of a lot of negative equity at the time. Handed that car back to him and just said to myself, let's go, like YouTube, let's focus on it, all of my time. And I've kind of never looked back. I mean, I know it's only, 4 years? I've never looked back at all on that. There's been ups and downs, and it hasn't been easy at all since then, especially sort of 22, when the car industry, the automotive industry, as it has been the last few years, really, it's been collapsing, and there's been less and less money around compared to, let's say, 2018, 19. And so a lot less advertising, organic advertising on YouTube's been happening. So YouTube was a bit of a rocky road. But I think I've kind of come through it the other side, and I like to think that I'm still surviving. I've seen a lot of older channels that I've watched for years that are really struggling these days. And it's just hard. And then you've got incredible, I mean, I call him a magician. We've already talked about him, Matt Armstrong. You've got the likes of Matt coming along this new wave, who are just absolutely destroying it in the YouTube space. And all you can do is sit back and watch and admire it, and just, hats off. And, there's so much to learn from what he does, but at the same time, nobody could replicate that, really. I mean, do you know what I mean? It's not like You could,
There's so many custom factors to the success that all just come together, from family members to team to work ethic. You know, I personally know him, and especially when we have a lot of fun, sometimes it's hard to compliment him loads, but when he messages the WhatsApp group, he's in that unit at 2:00 in the morning and they're back up the next day. And I just don't, it's like you said, people don't see all the investment in cameras and everything behind the scenes. And the hours that some of those boys put in is just unparamount. They just outwork anyone. But what I think is different about your style of content and the videos that you're creating is those guys have to achieve ridiculous views and take it to the next level, because the amount they're spending on their videos is so much money, like to repair those cars. You know, my friend Chris told me that he had to buy new brackets for the front of his McLaren 650S he's rebuilding, and those brackets, just these little bits of curved metal, were $2,500 just for some brackets to put the front bumper on. It's like, Jesus, I don't know how you boys actually do it. Like, even with like the views and the sponsorships and stuff, and like, quite it's tight. And they're like, I know, like people don't realise, but the difference is with what your style of content is. You're down the approach of, you go to the brands, you have press cars, you're able to take the latest and greatest thing, do a review. But then what that also does is probably make it very difficult to be honest on one side and keep the brands happy on the other side. And there's probably some wavy middle line, I'm guessing, in between. When did you start learning about that world?
Yeah, there is. And that's a very difficult balance, because I think, well, we're a new wave of media. And certainly when I started getting invited on press launches in sort of circa 2017, it was very difficult, because you get invited on your first, let's say, BMW, because we've mentioned them a few times, and you're down in the south of Spain. You're just flown down there on a business class flight, and you're staying in a 5-star resort, being served by a Michelin star chef, and you're there to review a car. Now, in those early years especially, you feel like you shouldn't even be there. Like, you know, you're sitting there, you know, there's a Henry Catchpole over here, there's a Roy Reid over there, and you're kind of sitting there thinking, what am I doing here? And how honest can I be about a particular car that we're reviewing? And I like to think, even when I look back on older videos, sort of 7-8-year-old videos, I like to think that I still was mostly honest and open about stuff. But there are things that I would perhaps say now where I believe I'm fully honest and engaged, like to the point where I've had a couple of cars over the last few years that I've thought were absolute dog shit, excuse my language, and I've contacted the press department and just said, look, take the car back. I'm not even making a video on it, because the car's so fundamentally bad that I would rather do that and just not review it than just put out a video just saying it's absolute garbage. Because I think, again, it's a bit like the comment thing we were talking about earlier on. There's a line, and I think if I've done that, number one, I've definitely ruined my relationship with the brand. But number two, I don't want to just badmouth something for the sake of badmouthing it, because that's not what my channel's about. But I do like to give some criticism to cars. The first thing I'll do with any car is try and find out what's wrong with it. And it's usually, for me, because I've got such a lanky frame, it's usually driving position a lot of the time. Your lovely Lamborghinis and stuff, I get in them and I'm just I'm like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, you know, like, so there's always something, there's always some kind of negative side to a car. And most of the time, these people, they're educated people that are spending 50, 100, 200 grand on a car. They know what the negatives are. And I think if you reinforce those negatives, then they at least then trust you further, right? They already know that
McLaren's probably going to go wrong.
But absolutely, yeah. 100%. And so so it's all about, but yeah, so to your question, I think the early days, it's hard to shuffle that. And I see content creators these days going on early launches and they're just saying positive things. And I think the flip side of that is brands have really switched on now. And you'll notice with a lot of the current and modern electric stuff, which to me is mostly boring. It's just so uninteresting, with exception of cars like the Ioniq 5N, which is actually a really good driver's car, even if it is electric. Porsche's Taycan, lovely bit of kit, but it's electric. It's just boring. It's paint drying to me. But what the manufacturers and brands do now is invite a lot of these I call them influencers because to me they seem to influence people's opinion on buying something. So if you're about to buy it and you see one of these characters promoting it, you quickly turn away from buying it. But anyway, these brands invite these influencers to these, and they literally, even if they're not getting paid, even if they're there as part of a press invite, they would just say positive stuff about everything, and it's just drivel. And I just think that's such a short-sighted approach from a brand and from a press team to invite these yes men and yes women to just say, yes, everything's amazing.
Well, could you just explain the difference? Because you did it to me earlier perfectly.
Yeah.
Because I think people like me would just look at, say, a brand and think marketing. Like, I'm sure Joe deals with marketing.
Yeah.
But there's a difference in there. So could you just explain the difference between a press team and the marketing at a company? For instance, like a BMW or an Audi.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, let's just use BMW as an example, because I know I get criticised by a lot of keyboard warriors for getting paid by BMW. I've actually got a BMW jumper on.
Do you get paid by BMW to be a happy mouth good person to BMW?
I wish that I did. I wish I made some kind of money, or I wish I even had the ability to get some budget out of BMW to film some elaborate video ideas that I've got in my head, but I don't. And I have to therefore go to other sponsors like Michelin to fund some of these elaborate videos, because BMW marketing team they genuinely wouldn't piss on me if I was on fire. They seem to have, I wouldn't say a hatred towards me, but they just seem to completely ignore me and pretend that I'm not there because I have an opinion. The press teams, however, in the UK and Australia and Germany, they love me. I mean, that makes it sound. I sound a bit big-headed. I don't mean it in the, they worship me.
Great relationship.
I've got a great relationship with me, and down to the individual people. I'd go out for a beer with most of them, not because they're going to give me a car next week, because they're actually lovely people, and they appreciate what I do. We're all on the same wavelength. Press team are there to hand out cars to people that they think they see fit to drive the car, and really should expect a honest review back and some honest feedback on what that product is. They're handing out products for honest feedback. There's no money exchanged. There shouldn't be any money exchange in press teams, although that's just started to change with some members. Well, I've heard rumours that Cupra press team are paying certain individuals to review their cars. That's where it gets really muddy to me, because as far as I'm concerned, if you're reviewing something from a journalistic point of view, or even a YouTuber's point of view, and it's a press car or whatever it might be, you should give your honest opinion, and you shouldn't be swayed otherwise.
Am I right in saying that a bit of an inspiration for that is Chris Harris? Because I think back in the day,
yep,
he got himself blacklisted, am I right in saying, from a couple of different brands? Like, I remember watching his review on a Ferrari 458 Spider, and I don't think that was the press car. I don't know, I might be wrong, but I've definitely seen him in more like private individuals' cars sometimes than press cars all the time, because he was one that just spoke his mind on the actual car, I think, as well. And it's a dangerous game, it seems, to play when you're actually in that world.
It is. And I think, Chris was, and I believe that what he said was absolutely true back then. A lot of the Ferrari press cars were just very well put together.
Turned up to the nines.
They turned up to nines. And, but then you hear it today, even with, I've heard things about fairly recent McLaren launches that we never saw, that nothing ever made it to press or anything, because during the launch, so many of the press cars ended up in flames and everything was shut down, and years later the same car was launched. So it's still, in a weird way, happens today, but we don't hear about these things happening as much. But Chris definitely, he called out Ferrari back in the day, whether it was true or not, who knows. And their relationship went sour for a few years, but now obviously it's back and going strong.
But you're doing YouTube. You got yourself a vehicle, you're creating content around it, and then you've got to get yourself some other cars on the channel to then develop your channel back then and take it to the next level, those press cars. How would you approach a brand and be like, 'cause this is going to be alien to most people listening, and being like, I want you to give me your new £150,000 car, and I'd like you to take me to dinner and give me a hotel and give me all of this for free, and I'm going to come and have a really nice time, but I might not say good things about it. How do you convince them to do that?
Well, to be honest, I was really bad proactively at doing that, especially in the early days. And I was really grateful, like, say, my relationship with Audi, because we talk way too much about BMW. They haven't given me enough brown paper envelopes recently. So, so looking at Audi, for instance, I got an invite for them out of the blue on an email one day for, I think it was the B8 RS4 or B9 RS4, whatever. And then it's all about building relationships as quickly. And it's really difficult because you get invited on your first launch, and car launches are really rushed, especially ones in the UK. You have such limited time to do everything. So you're there to do a job, but especially in the early ones, you're also there to make a nice example and actually get to meet the PR team and, you know, hope that they will remember you and you've left a bit of a imprint. But then you've also got to film a video and the time's ticking away and there's all these things going on. So it's just, in the early days, I think I was really bad at being proactive around that and contacting teams. There was a lot of people out there that are really good at doing that, and they probably have, you know, had 10 times more invites than I have as a result. But yeah, it's just, and then when you do get there, being honest as possible. I think it's a fine balance. It's just reading the room and also just being yourself. Because I think, like I said earlier on, I look back on the majority of my videos and think I was pretty much completely honest throughout that whole video. And I wouldn't have changed anything if I could go back to film it. And I think that's what, for me, I've always sort of thrived in that. There's certain brands that I wouldn't go near. There's certain manufacturers I'm not interested in.
It's Italy.
It's what you mean, Ferrari,
yeah. Lamborghini. I don't say. Yeah, you're very. If I think of jokers, I think German. I think Porsche, I think BMW, I think Audi.
I think more. I think only because I think it's, for me, my audience. I think my audience is of a certain level in terms of budget, and the supercar thing, especially when I started, had already been done to death. You know, you had Shmee, you had Paul Wallace, you had all these guys, JWW, all doing these supercars and high-end stuff. And that's great. But to me, I started my channel on a hot hatch. And I'm slowly, I think, with my audience, moving up now to like M3s, 911s, that sort of thing. And to me, my pinnacle car, the car that I would aspire to own one day, money no object, would be something like a GT3 Touring, which I know is still a lot of money, but it's not crazy money. I appreciate the Italian stuff, but again, coming down to my frame, I don't fit in Ferraris very well. Driving position's horrendous. Lamborghinis are even worse. And if I can't fit in a car comfortably, it ruins the whole car for me. You know, like, to me, it's like getting in this van if the roof is down here. Oh, Jesus Christ, Ben, what are we doing in it? Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's miserable from the outset. So those cars in one way don't appeal to me just because I don't tend to fit in Italian cars that well. And also they're just, to me, that's just not my audience. That's a sort of, yeah.
But it's important that you fit in certain cars and you choose which cars you fit in, because some of them you spent a very long time in. Yeah. And some of my favourite videos on your channel, which are completely unique as far as I'm concerned in the creator space that I've seen, are your tank of fuel challenges. Now, I was absolutely captivated by one of these videos, and I think you started at Morocco.
Yep.
Was it right down on that tip, and you drove to London on one tank of fuel? Now, I have never been so excited to watch a video on a diesel car, but the way you do the thumbnail is like you in the car and then the map sort of etched into it with how far the route is. It's like 22 hours of driving. Now, the cars I drive especially, I struggle to make it out on a flipping date even. One of those cars and come back without running out of a tank of fuel. So the idea of going that far is absolutely insane. What was your first experience of doing something like that? Where did you get the idea along this kind of creative process that you were going to attempt to drive a vehicle that far on a tank of fuel, and tell us a story about it?
Well, like yourself, I love my fast cars. I love my track driving. I love going fast. There's a element of danger and adrenaline and all the rest of it. That's great. So that's one side of the automotive space that I love and always have done. But the other side that I love, especially as I get older, is the efficiency side of things and hypermiling. And I think I've always appreciated a good diesel. When I was a chauffeur, my 730D, that engine code is, let's just get it right, N57. Yes, 3-litre inline 6 turbocharged diesel. Absolutely amazing unit, right? But so efficient. It would do 45 miles to the gallon in town. It would do 55 miles to the gallon out of town. It just did everything. And it was fast and, it even made a decent sound for a diesel. So I've always been obsessed with diesels and eking out a little bit of range, or as much range as I could. As the years went on, and during COVID, in fact, I started doing some mileage challenges with my 7 Series. That was the new one that I just said that I'd hardly put any miles on. And I did one in that. And that gained a lot of traction online. People were like, oh, this is crazy. You can do, I think I managed 900 miles, which is the 900 miles I gave it back to Tony with on one tank of fuel.
900
miles. And at the time,
one tank of fuel.
And I did it naively then. I didn't, it got to 0 and then that was the video over for me. It was like, it's got to dash. That's it, over. I've done 901 miles. I'm at a petrol station. What obviously in hindsight, and what we all know is when your car says 0, you do have, there's some reserve.
You've got to run out, mate.
Yeah, you've got to run it to the end. And so a couple of years later, Patrick and I ended up buying another 7 Series, a short wheel, standard wheelbase, because mine was long because it was a chauffeuring car. So it was like, and an SE spec. It was a real Bogo spec car with like, I think it even had 16-inch wheels and like tyre sidewalls like that. And we ended up driving that car we set the challenge to drive from London to Madrid, which was about 1,100 miles. And we did it with ease. In fact, we got to Madrid and it had 120 miles, I think, of range left showing. So again, it was a regret because we got there at like 4 a.m. We're absolutely shattered. I was seeing things run out on the road. I was so tired. When you get tired on the road, pull over and have a rest. And thankfully I had Patrick, who's a lot younger than me, to sit next to, and he took over the wheel because I was sitting in the passenger seat so delirious and tired that I was seeing zebras and stuff run out in the middle of the road. And this is what I've never been that tired and forcing myself to stay awake. So yeah, that's a little lesson. When you get tired, stop, take a break, because it's a real thing. You start seeing some weird shit. So anyway, so we did that trip and it was like, okay, well, we could have gone further if we'd planned it better. We could have done it over 2 days. Right, next one has to be like going for, what's the world record? So we went online and a few years ago, back in 2011, a couple did the world record in a Volkswagen Passat of a certain era, which was 1,585 miles on a single tank. Yeah, of diesel. And so anyway, we thankfully spoke to Michelin, who got on board because, as you can imagine, it was an expensive project to fund.
I was just absolutely baffled by what you're telling me. 1,500 miles.
1,585 or 84 is the official, still to this day, world record. And obviously with electric cars and stuff, the way I don't think that's ever going to get beaten. So our first job was to go and find that exact car and model on the used market. And as we found out, there was very few around because they only sold them for a small period of time. Less than a year, Volkswagen sold that particular car with that particular fuel tank. It was a 70-litre fuel tank, whereas the Passat, the regular diesel Passat, would come with a 60-litre. So obviously that extra 10 litres made a huge difference in terms of your mileage. It was actually a tank out of an A6 Ultra, which was, again, a hypermiling car of its time based on the Le Mans car. So anyway, we've eventually found one at auction. We had lots of work done to it to make it, well, nothing to enhance its performance, but just to make sure it was because we paid $2,500 for it, but we made sure like the belts were changed and anything. If you're doing a challenge like that and you've gone down to Morocco and you're heading back and then something goes in it and the whole video's in the bin, right? Like if it had a mechanical. So we had all the injectors done. a lot of money was spent on that car to get it, to make sure that it was running fit. That's it, not to enhance its performance. Although we did have some special e-primacy tyres, which definitely helped with the hypermiling. But anyway, once we had the car, we then went down to Morocco, and the challenge for me was to get back to the UK. And to get back to the UK,
You're driving from the UK to Morocco, back.
No. So Patrick drove the car down there. I was actually at a press launch. He takes a mickey out of me because he's like, talent's arrived. He's just flying on a business class flight. I'll just drive the car down there. And actually, that's what happened, but only because I was at a press launch. So I flew into Malaga, met him there. We caught the ferry over to Morocco, spent a couple of days in Morocco. It was beautiful, actually, really amazing. We had lovely time there, amazing food, and just, it's bizarre because you get off the ferry, 1 minute you're in Spain and a few hours later you're in Morocco, and it's just such a culture shock, and you're not getting off a plane. I've been all around the world and I love it, but it's like, wow, I'm in Morocco with my own car, which is bizarre. It's definitely worth doing if you're thinking about it. And so anyway, so the journey back, to me, it was like, if we make it to Calais and the Eurotunnel, we've then made it to the UK because we're in a train. We're going to come out the other side. So that in my head, and I think that was about 1,350 miles. So I was like, if we can make that, then great. If we don't make that, then it's Africa to France or Morocco to. It doesn't, like, yeah, you could put 1,200 miles, but to me, it was the whole, like, Africa to England, or at the very best, Africa to London or Morocco to London, because that really sounds punchy. And anyway, we got to the train, about 20 miles away from Calais. The weather was awful. It was really foggy. The whole journey was actually pretty bad. We had a headwind. We had everything against us. You go through the Pyrenees as you're leaving Spain, coming into France. So you've got all these challenges that, if you're doing a hypermile challenge, are not in your favor, right? But we got 20 miles out of Calais and the car had clocked to 0. So it had got dash, no range left. So I was confident that we'd get to the tunnel because I knew that Passat, I'd read online that people are getting 60 to 80 miles when it gets to 0. So in my head, I was like, right, we're going to get to the train. But still, it was nerve-wracking. Got to the train, quite emotional. I think I even shed a couple of tears with Patrick. We're both quite emotional when we got on the train. We're like, we've done it. And then it was, how far further are we going to go? So we get off the train and it was pissing with rain in the UK, as it always is. Doesn't matter what time of year. You get off the Eurotunnel, you leave beautiful France, and then you get out and it's grey, which is a handful of miles away, and it's grey and raining. It's like, welcome home. And then you're on the beautiful M20, which is just like driving over concrete slabs. So we're there in this rain and it's foggy and it's just a bit miserable. And we're on a smart motorway, or they should be called dumb motorways because they got no hard shoulders. So we're in this car knowing that it's a bit naughty because we're knowing it's going to run out of fuel at some point, right? And I'm quite safety conscious, I think, as I get older. So I'm in a reflective. I've already got my reflective vest on to get out, and because we got 10 litres of diesel in the boot. But I just didn't want to. I thought, I don't want to pull over and have to fill up because could end up dead. So we're going up this M20, and soon we're looking at the maps. We're like, we're not far away from the M25. But it just seems to, when you're conscious of mileage, it just seems to climb and climb and climb and climb. Whereas normally you'd get off and you don't even think about it. You just drive. You're driving back to London, right? So we get to the M25. Again, we have like a mini celebration. We've made it officially really inside the M25. So we made it to London. Then we got into central London. This is like 2:30 in the morning. We started doing some supercar spotting. We're like, when's this thing going to run out of fuel? I'd parked Patrick's car at the airport. And so we decided to go to Heathrow, leave central London, go to Heathrow, because then we'd be reunited with his car and that's where it can end. So we got to Heathrow Airport. Again, at this point, we're at 1,460 miles. Yeah, 1,460 when we got to Heathrow. And then 3 in the morning, and we're just doing laps of the Northern Perimeter Road because there's a roundabout here, and there's like a mile between them. So we're just going one, like, when's this thing going to run out of fuel? And finally, at 1,483 miles, all the lights came up on the dashboard. It suddenly started starving, and we literally couldn't have timed it better because there was like a low curb where the emergency vehicles pulled it up there, and it was like, it's dead. And all we could do was celebrate. You know, how often do you celebrate your car running out of fuel? Never, apart from when you've spent 2 very long days on the road and you're like,
that's insane.
Yeah.
Like even sat here, just like those hypermile challenges. I said to you before when I was like, you can tell by the views of the channel, like they are so fascinating. Like what you were saying there about like going into a headwind effect in it and what tires you're on, and just like, this is the shit's getting scientific. Like, what?
But it shouldn't be exciting, should it?
How do you gain another 20 miles? It's like how you gain 2/10 on a track. You know what I
Exactly
mean?
the same. Yeah.
Completely like a real similar concept, but that's an example of a video for you going extremely well.
Yeah.
Like the views absolutely smashed it. The concept smashed it. I want to have a go at doing it myself.
Yeah.
I never thought I'd be so inspired to do something so boring in a way, which is sitting at 50 mile an hour for God knows.
And it is so boring.
I can imagine it's mind-numbing. But during that journey of becoming a YouTuber, like a road to success isn't always easy. And I think one of the things that I saw around your journey, and we've seen recently some automotive YouTubers have some difficulties with their channels and journeys and mistakes were made. But you had a pretty big online blow up around an incident with an Audi R8.
Yep.
Right. Do you want to explain what happened there?
Yeah. So back in 2018, back end of 2018 it was, I had an Audi R8 and I was actually going up to near Manchester where a good friend was getting married. And I decided that after his wedding weekend, I would take the car off somewhere nice to film a review and video on it as I was up there. Now, at the time, I didn't realise that the Snake Pass was quite a hot spot for speeding and motorbikes and accidents and loads of things going on there. I didn't realise that, and I just thought it looked like a lovely road to film a video on. So I've gone up there with the R8. As it turned out, the weather wasn't that great. It was quite a sort of grey day, and I decided not to film a video there because it was busier than I thought. And I thought, you know what, I'll film my review when I'm back down nearer London where I live. But while I'm here, let's just get a couple of clips of videos because I'm on this picturesque road. I'm in this R8. So I decided, because most people love the R8, and I know you can relate to this, is the V10 engine is a big part of that car. So I put a mic in the engine bay and I put a GoPro down the side of the car and just filmed. It was about a 40-second clip of me meandering down this road with the V10 soundtrack really blaring. So you could just hear V10, gear changes. Now, it wasn't a clip of me saying, look at me, look how fast I'm going, because if you look at the clip, anyone that can actually drive, it's not fast. There's not like crazy amounts of speed there. I'm not denying that I wasn't speeding. And of course, a massive regret of what I did eventually came down to me getting done for speeding. And I don't condone speeding, especially on a public road. But what happened from that small clip, the police and the Crown Prosecution Service clearly decided to make an example of me.
Which one of their titles that they used was Joe Achilles gets speeding fine after police spot video of him driving a £125,000 Audi R8 at nearly 100 mile an hour on Britain's most dangerous road.
Yes, exactly. So as we know, headlines, as we do with titles, we like to jazz them up a bit. And yeah, when you put all those ingredients together, I mean, it looks really bad. And like I said, and I've said this many times, I put my hand up to speeding. I was over the speed limit for the majority of that clip. Was I dangerous driving? Was I showing off about speed? Absolutely not. There's nothing in that clip that is dangerous or alarming. And that begs the question, 12 months on from that, when we were in court and the judge actually saw the video, he asked them to replay it 3 times and then looked at the police and everyone that was in the courtroom and basically said to him, if we hadn't just been through 12 months of all this process and coming to court, if I'd just seen that and you're telling me that Mr. Achilles has not caused any harm, damage, been reported, I don't understand what we're looking at here. You've proved that he was speeding, but I mean, really, like, what is that clip about, and why have we got
What
to
more do you want to do?
Yeah, what more do you want to do, and why have we got to this place?
Why had you got to that place? So the video goes live. What
Yep.
then happened between then and ending up in court with a judge looking at it like that?
So the video went live on my Instagram page and on my Facebook page, so about 10 days after that, I got an email from, it was an Audi press car, which obviously at the time was difficult. I got an email from the Audi press department saying, we've had a notice of intended prosecution with our car in it over these dates. So it's like, well, yep, okay, I was the only one insured in it. I had the car, and it was up near the Snake Pass, whatever the postcode was, Derbyshire. Yep, that was me. So anyway, yes, it was me. Right, we'll give them your details. That's how it works for press cars. So then the police then forward that to you as the driver. So I'd then had a week or so to think, wait a second, like where did I get done? Where's the cameras? And I knew I'd recorded basically my entire run. So I'm looking on the camera going, there's no cameras, there's no speed. Researching, are there any cameras? No, there used to be one here, but that's not in use anymore, blah, blah, blah. Are there any undercover vans? And I've gone up and down it 1,000 times. I'm like, I don't understand where they've got this from. But anyway, so yes, I was the driver of this car. Now, about 4.5 months. So after I've sent this off, yes, I was a driver. But I said I wasn't dangerous driving because they'd put me down as dangerous driving and excessive speeding. And I said, as far as I'm aware, I wasn't speeding and I wasn't dangerous driving. Sent it off. 4.5 months later, maybe it was nearly 5 months later, I came home from another press launch and I couldn't open the front door because there was an envelope that was that big behind it with 90 pages of from the CPS, basically going through frame by frame. It was like you'd think I'd just gone and murdered like 50 children or something. The amount of work and time and effort and money they'd put into this document. I mean, is it a document? It wasn't. It was a book.
Which is what I'm not used to seeing the police do either.
Yeah, exactly, especially up there where there was a lot of real crime going on. They seem to be ignoring. But anyway, so I had this 90-page, and I'm not exaggerating, it was 89 pages document going through frame by frame of my camera, of my this, of that, you're doing this speed here. They'd use this guy, they've got this expert along who I'd found out since is only used in mass pile-ups on motorways where there's multiple fatalities and stuff. He's the big wig that the police will use or the Crown prosecution will use when there's serious incidents. Otherwise, this guy wouldn't get out of bed for less than...
Just to clarify, to watch a video to figure out how fast a car is going based on its movements past a line.
Exactly. And that's what people need to realise is this camera, firstly, didn't even show me. Secondly, it didn't show speed or anything because it was outside.
Which is your own GoPro attached to a car.
My own GoPro.
And they'd pick that footage up and then was rolling with
They'd use points along the road, various points, whether it's a tree or a farm gate, and they'd then gone down there and measured it all up. All of this was in the booklet.
Wow.
So 45 pages of that was that. The next 45 pages, which is really interesting and something that obviously never gets talked about in the press or didn't get talked about in the press when it all came out, was the other half of the booklet was the dangerous driving side of it. Now, while I had that R8, I was filming a video with Auto Trader at a place called Long Cross Studios, which is kind of dying or almost not available so much nowadays. But it used to have a beautiful road that a lot of the magazines and stuff would test on.
I drove it as a driving experience when I was younger.
Did you? Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
it looks like a normal UK road, right? And actually you see it in a lot of films and programs these days still. I'm always like, that's filmed at Long Cross. But we'd filmed this video where it was that versus a Tesla. And there was a jump at the Long Cross Studios. I can't remember what it was called, but there was a jump section where in a fast car like an R8, you could come out of this hairpin and actually just get some air over it. But it was designed so the car wouldn't nose. It was like a test facility almost. So part of that video was the R8 just jumping over this thing. And we had cameras set up and everything. Patrick had taken a video clip on his phone behind the scenes. And I'd posted that on my Instagram around the same time as this other video clip. And I'd said, clearly filmed on private land, blah, 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 blah. We had the entire Auto Trader, the amount of evidence and proof we had that we were there with that car doing exactly that they had the proper footage from the cameras. There was no getting away from the fact that what we had filmed was there on private land. But this expert had said that I'd jumped the R8 along that clip was actually along the Snake Pass.
Tried to
Piled it in. There's trust me, I've only been along the Snake Pass that once, and I'm probably never going back again. But from memory, there is nowhere that you could jump an R8 along the Snake Pass unless you're doing 300 miles an hour, right?
So you had to convince them that clip was from Longcross and the other one was the clip that, fair enough.
Yes, but to do that costs a lot of money. And because you need your expert, you need to go legal, obviously. Then you need your own expert to prove them wrong, even though you can't. It's not just a case of going, no, 1 second, you're wrong. No, the process and the expense of trying to plead your innocence is really, really difficult. And the reason that they'd used that second part, I'm sure, is what really convinced the Crown Prosecution Service and got some energy behind going after me. But after I'd proven my innocence around that, it was then too late, because it was like, okay, then, all right, so you didn't jump the car, no dangerous driving. We're now going to focus on the speeding. But by that point, you're knees deep, and they've already got you. They've got you in the name of the law, and they've got you in court. But it was such an in the court with my own expert, I managed to prove that the speeds they'd used were incorrect, because I actually had in-car footage and stuff. I was speeding, but I wasn't. They say, I think some of the articles, I think they said they proved that I was doing up to 93 miles an hour, which soon became 100 and 100 plus, and all these headlines. But I'd proved that wasn't correct, and I think the top speed that I proved I was doing was 78, which is still over the limit. But in an R8 along a beautiful road, 70 odd miles an hour, it's not dangerous driving. It's just stupidity. So I'd proved all that. But the very next day after this is all, so I'd had 10, 11 months of all this situation happening, spending 20 odd grand in legal fees, which is every penny I had at the time. Saw back for about 6 months because of the stress of it all and all the rest of it. It was just horrible. I hated that period of my life. To then walk out of the courtroom after the judge seeing everything, eventually seeing pity in what had happened and how I'd kind of been targeted. He gave me 6 points because he asked me, clean license. Yep, I had a clean license 10 years. Will 6 points affect your living and all the rest of it? No. 6 points is actually quite good, because that then I can't do anything naughty after 6 points. 6 points is a fair thing for my speeding, etc. I'd walked out of the courtroom the very next morning. I was at work, and as in with one of my clients, and suddenly I'm getting loads of messages from friends. I picked up the Metro this morning. You're in the Metro. You're on the news. Or, the BBC went down there. They sent a whole team of people to the Snake Pass on the section of road where I was driving to report. And again, it's like, but 1 second, guys, what did I actually do? Did I kill, did I have an accident and kill someone that I wasn't aware of? Because the way you're reporting about it, it seems like I did, right? Or was it, inverted commas, just a speeding incident? And then Adam Shipley, who was the guy that was in charge of the police, or that, this particular thing, he went to town. He went up and down the country to all the newspapers and basically badmouthed me. I mean, you can read up all the articles, the stuff he said. On one article to a Scottish newspaper, he said, this should teach people like Achilles, people like Mr. Achilles, who think they can come to our country and drive like... And it's like, what, because I've got a surname? Do you know what I mean? Things like that. And the press just ran with it. And thankfully, they say, what is it? Yesterday's news lines are bins or whatever. It did blow over relatively quickly, but I did get some really horrible hatred and emails around it from people. Like one guy had emailed me because his daughter had got killed by a reckless driver or whatever, which is obviously heartbreaking and horrible to hear. But when you're getting, you get attacked like that, and him saying, your clients shouldn't use you, you shouldn't be a driver, you shouldn't be a chauffeur, just really trying to wreck my living and my life. And it was a hard thing to come back from. But I'm just lucky that a lot of people, my clients, completely understood. And
did that affect your relationship with any brands for a certain amount of time, or rebuilding that trust? And did it almost make you quit YouTube in any way?
It certainly reset a lot of things. I think Audi UK weren't particularly pleased, which is totally understandable because it was one of their cars and it's not a good light that, I was speeding in an R8. But they were kind of kept in the dark until the articles came out, because in my head it was like, well, I didn't know until suddenly, literally within an hour, the whole of the internet's full of these articles about me. I thought after court, I was like, okay, I've done my time, I've paid my thing, I'm going to walk away. And suddenly the whole world knows about it. Yeah. And so Audi, I think a few people probably did step away from me. And I remember hearing stories about various people talking about me in a bad light. But to me, one thing, I think there's a lot of positives that came from it. I learned a big lesson. And I think it taught a lot of people in the automotive space, including a lot of seasoned journalists and magazines, all the big ones. I know now, years later, a lot of them have come up and talked to me and said, you were like a guinea pig in a way that we used to do this, we used to do that. Now we don't. And we're very careful with stuff. And so I'm glad that
Evos and those kind of videos that used to be, sliding and jumping cars on video up in Scotland and different passes and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And for your video to be taken and dissected like you're looking for a bullet inside a body.
Yeah, yeah.
It was, I remember it. I do vividly remember it. And I remember the videos everywhere because it did act as a wake-up call for a lot of people, and I guess that was their whole intention behind doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like I said, if there's a positive light, but unfortunately, it hasn't taught the next generation many things from what you see online. You see some horrific stuff, that is like people doing 80, 100 mile an hour down bus lanes in built-up air, like that sort of stuff really upsets me. And, people might say, well, you're a hypocrite because you do it yourself, but there's a difference when you're out in the middle of the countryside doing 20 mile an hour over the limit in a supercar in nice conditions to someone doing 100 mile an hour down a 20 mile an hour, bus lane with kids and people around. But I think it was a horrible period of my life and something that I wouldn't wish on anyone to go through. But I learned a big lesson from it, and it was all part of the journey. And like you said, road to success. Life is full of ups and downs, and if it wasn't, your success wouldn't be as joyful and rewarding as it is, right?
Well, you've achieved 73.1 million views up to now on your channel across 759 videos and over 250,000 subscribers. And that doesn't include short form content associated with brands and everything else that you've done.
Yep.
You managed to get yourself through all of those views into your own dream car. You had a G81, am I right in saying?
Yeah, yep.
It's dark green?
Yeah, British Racing Green.
It's so cool. But when you hear those numbers and you hear the achievements of yourself that I'm sort of written out to you, even considering some of those hardships and the times, has the whole YouTube journey been worth it?
Definitely. Yeah, 100%. Like I said at the beginning, I think I still pinch myself to this day. Even having, the likes of you contacting me, wanting me on your podcast still doesn't really compute and make sense to me because I listen to your stuff all the time. And now I'm going to be on it. So just things like that are just very cool. And it's definitely worth all the effort, blood, sweat and tears.
Well, thank you so much for your enthusiasm over the last hour and all the stories. And I'm sure there's hours worth more on them. But Joe, I've enjoyed having you in the back of my van. I've enjoyed listening to your podcast, Drive Talk. And also, I am 100%. I'd love everyone to comment down below if you've got this far with me. My next idea of a fun road trip is genuinely doing a mileage challenge. Like in my head, I'm going, how far can I get a McLaren? Like, what's that? Thinking, how far can I do something like that? So I've been spurred on by your creativity too. So thank you for joining me.
You, mate.
It's been a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you at an event soon.
Thank you, mate. Thanks, guys.